When 38-year-old wilderness guide Rachel Torres and her German Shepherd, Atlas, stumbled upon a camouflaged steel door buried beneath decades of forest growth in the Colorado Rockies, she thought she'd discovered an abandoned mine shaft or forgotten bunker. But what lay behind that door would expose a 40-year-old cover-up involving toxic waste, corporate conspiracy, and the mysterious illnesses that had plagued her mountain community for generations, and put her life in immediate danger. Pause for engagement. Before we dive into this incredible story, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And if stories like this grab you, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow I've got another mind-blowing discovery that you won't want to miss. The morning mist clung to the pine trees as Rachel Torres adjusted her hiking pack and checked Atlas's harness one final time. March in the San Juan Mountains of southwestern Colorado meant unpredictable weather. Brilliant sunshine could transform into whiteout conditions within an hour, and temperatures could swing 40 degrees between dawn and dusk. But after 15 years guiding tourists through these wilderness trails, Rachel knew every ridge, every hidden valley, every seasonal stream that carved through the ancient volcanic rock. Today wasn't a guided tour, though. Today was deeply, painfully personal. Rachel's small business, Torres Mountain Adventures, operated out of a converted barn on the outskirts of Pinecrest Valley, a town of roughly 1,200 souls tucked into a mountain valley 30 miles from the nearest interstate. For over a decade, she'd built a modest but steady income leading hiking expeditions, teaching wilderness survival courses, and offering photography tours during the fall aspen season when the mountainsides exploded into gold and crimson. But the past 3 years had seen a steady, inexorable decline in bookings. Not because of her skills, her 5-star reviews remained consistent. Not because of competition, she was still the only certified guide operating in the valley. The problem was darker, more insidious, and far more personal. The sickness. That's what locals called it when they spoke of it at all, which wasn't often. A mysterious cluster of cancer cases and autoimmune disorders affecting people who'd lived in Pinecrest Valley for more than a decade. Lymphomas, leukemias, thyroid disorders, mysterious neurological conditions that left previously healthy people with tremors and cognitive decline. Rachel herself had watched her mother, Elena Torres, succumb to an aggressive non-Hodgkin's lymphoma 2 years ago. She'd been 63 years old, a retired nurse who'd spent 40 years in these mountains, who'd hiked 10 miles a week well into her 60s, who'd never smoked, rarely drank, and maintained a garden that was the envy of the valley. The cancer had ravaged her in 8 months. From diagnosis to death, a brutal, incomprehensible decline that left Rachel reeling with grief and fury in equal measure. And Elena hadn't been alone. In a town of 1,200 people, 17 cases of rare cancers or severe autoimmune disorders in 5 years was a statistical nightmare. Jim Nakamura, who'd run the hardware store for 30 years. The Chen twins, just 16 years old when they were both diagnosed with leukemia within months of each other. Sarah Whitehorse, a Ute elder who'd lived on tribal land adjacent to the valley her entire 72 years. The list went on, a litany of loss that had transformed Pinecrest Valley from a tight-knit mountain community into a place shadowed by fear and suspicion. The investigation that went nowhere. The state health department had investigated, of course. After the 10th case, pressure from concerned residents had forced their hand. A team of epidemiologists had spent 3 weeks in the valley, conducting interviews, testing water supplies, examining soil samples, reviewing medical records. Their conclusion, delivered in a 70-page report that Rachel had read so many times she'd practically memorized it: coincidental cluster. Within normal statistical variation for a rural population of this size. No evidence of environmental contamination. No identifiable common exposure factor. The report had been bureaucratic, clinical, and, Rachel was certain, completely wrong. Her mother had thought so too. Elena Torres, with her decades of nursing experience and her intimate knowledge of the community, had spent her final months obsessively documenting every case. She'd created a hand-drawn map that covered the entire east wall of their kitchen, marking each diagnosis with a red pin, noting dates, symptoms, progression, outcomes. Rachel had come home from leading a hiking group one afternoon to find her mother standing before that map, tears streaming down her face, her finger tracing invisible lines between the pins. "Look at the pattern, Mija," Elena had said, her voice hoarse from the chemotherapy that wasn't working. "Everyone affected lives downstream from the same watershed. We all draw water from the same aquifer. We all hunt elk and deer that graze in the same valleys, fish in the same streams." "Mom," the health department said. The health department said what they were told to say. Elena's voice had hardened with uncertainty Rachel had rarely heard from her gentle mother. "Someone is protecting something, Rachel. Someone with more power than sick people in a forgotten mountain town." Rachel had dismissed it then as the conspiracy, thinking of someone facing their own mortality, desperate for answers, for someone to blame. But now, standing at the edge of the wilderness with her mother's journal in her pack and Atlas waiting patiently at her side, she wondered if Elena had been right all along. The promise. Elena's final days in the hospice center in Durango had been a blur of morphine, whispered conversations, and the slow, terrible process of watching someone you love slip away piece by piece. But one conversation stood out with crystalline clarity. It had been 3 days before the end. Elena had been drifting in and out of consciousness, but suddenly her eyes had opened with unexpected focus, and she'd gripped Rachel's hand with surprising strength. "Promise me something, Mija." "Anything, Mom. Anything. Promise me you'll find out why." Elena's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Something's poisoning our home. Something they don't want anyone to find. Promise me you won't let them get away with it." Rachel had made that promise through tears, holding her mother's frail hand, having no idea how she would possibly fulfill it. What did she know about environmental investigations, corporate wrongdoing, government cover-ups? She was a wilderness guide, not a detective or scientist. But a promise made at a deathbed was sacred, and Rachel had spent the past 2 years trying to figure out where to even begin. The breakthrough had come yesterday, in the most unexpected way. Rachel had been avoiding the task for months, going through her mother's belongings, deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to discard. The house in Pinecrest Valley sat exactly as Elena had left it, a shrine to a life interrupted. Rachel visited occasionally, paid the utilities to keep the pipes from freezing, but couldn't bring herself to truly begin the process of dismantling her childhood home. But yesterday, facing another month where Torres mountain adventures barely broke even, where potential clients read online forums about the sickness and chose to hike elsewhere, Rachel had forced herself to start the process. She'd been going through the hall closet, sorting through boxes of old hiking maps, field guides, and her mother's nursing textbooks, when she found it, a leather journal tucked inside a box labeled Medical Reference Materials. The journal was recent, its pages filled with her mother's careful handwriting, dated entries spanning the final year of her life. Medical observations. Water quality concerns. Increasingly desperate notes about being stonewalled by local officials, ignored by state agencies, dismissed by federal environmental regulators. Rachel had sat on the closet floor, reading by the dim overhead light, as her mother's investigation unfolded across the pages. Elena had been far more active than Rachel had realized, reaching out to environmental scientists, contacting journalists, even hiring a private water testing lab with money she couldn't afford to spend. The results had been inconclusive, trace amounts of various compounds, but nothing that exceeded federal safety standards. Yet Elena had remained convinced that something was wrong, that the official testing protocols were designed to miss whatever was actually causing the illness. And then, about 2 months before her death, the entries changed tone dramatically. Elena had found someone willing to talk. Met with Henry Castellanos today. He's dying, knows it, finally ready to talk. Worked for Apex Chemical in the 80s. Says they buried something in the High Valley, Section 14, North Fork drainage. Made him sign papers, threaten his family. He drew me a map. Rachel, if you're reading this and I'm gone, this is where you start looking. The old survey marker, 200 yards west, look for the rock formation shaped like a sleeping bear. He says there's a door. Rachel had stared at those words for a long time, her heart pounding. Apex Chemical. She'd heard that name before, but couldn't immediately place where. A quick internet search had revealed the basics. Apex Chemical Corporation, a mid-sized chemical manufacturing company that had operated a facility just outside of Durango from 1978 to 1987. The plant had produced industrial solvents, pesticides, and various chemical intermediates used in manufacturing processes. The company had closed the Durango facility in 1987, citing changing market conditions and consolidation of operations. The property had been sold, decontaminated according to standards of the time, and eventually redeveloped into a light industrial park. But according to Henry Castellanos, whoever he was, Apex Chemical had buried something in the mountains before they left. Something worth threatening employees to keep secret. Rachel had spent the rest of the day cross-referencing her mother's map with modern topographic surveys and wilderness boundary maps. Section 14, North Fork Drainage. It was federal wilderness land now, part of the San Juan Wilderness area. Protected, supposedly pristine, no industrial activity permitted for decades. Which made it the perfect place to hide something you never wanted found. The hike. Rachel had set out before dawn, telling no one where she was going. She'd learned enough about her mother's investigation to know that people asking questions about Apex Chemical tended to hit walls, official walls, bureaucratic walls, walls of silence from former employees who'd signed non-disclosure agreements. If there was something up there, she wanted to see it for herself before involving anyone else. The trailhead started at 9,200 feet elevation, accessed by a rutted Forest Service road that was barely passable even in her well-maintained Jeep. From there, the hike climbed through dense forest of ponderosa pine and Douglas fir, following an old trail that had once been used by miners in the 1890s but was now maintained primarily by elk and deer. Atlas, her 3-year-old German Shepherd, ranged ahead with the easy confidence of a dog who'd spent most of his life in the wilderness. Rachel had adopted him from a rescue organization 5 years ago, when he was just a year old. He'd been found abandoned near a trailhead, probably dumped by owners who couldn't handle his energy and intelligence. He'd proven to be a gift from the universe. Atlas had accompanied Rachel on hundreds of hikes, had found lost hikers more than once with his exceptional nose and tracking ability, and had become her constant companion through the lonely years after her mother's death. "Stay close, buddy," Rachel called as they crossed a particularly steep section where the trail switchbacked up a rocky slope. "We're going off trail soon." The hike took 3 hours, climbing through constantly changing terrain. They crossed 2 swollen creeks, still running high with snowmelt from the peaks above. They navigated through boulder fields where ancient rock slides had torn through the forest. They paused on windswept ridges where the view stretched for 100 miles, encompassing layer after layer of mountain ranges fading into blue distance. Under different circumstances, Rachel would have reveled in the beauty, in the profound silence of wilderness broken only by wind and birdsong. But today, every step took her closer to answers she wasn't sure she wanted to find. The discovery. As Rachel approached the coordinates her mother had marked in the journal, the terrain grew noticeably rougher. This was old-growth forest, the kind that had somehow escaped the logging frenzies of the late 1800s. Massive ponderosa pines, some of them easily 4 feet in diameter, created a canopy so thick that the forest floor remained shadowed even at midday. The undergrowth was sparse in the deep shade, just scattered ferns, moss-covered deadfall, and the accumulated duff of centuries of fallen needles. It was the kind of place that felt primeval, untouched by human hands. Which made what happened next all the more jarring. Atlas suddenly stopped, his entire body going rigid in the focused stance Rachel had learned meant he'd detected something significant. His ears were forward, his nose working the air, his attention fixed on something Rachel couldn't yet see. "What is it, boy? What do you smell?" The dog moved forward cautiously, not with the excited energy of finding a deer trail or catching scent of a rabbit, but with something more careful, more uncertain. He approached a distinctive rock formation, 3 massive granite boulders, each the size of a small car, leaning against each other in a way that did, remarkably, resemble a sleeping bear. Rachel's breath caught. This was it. the landmark Henry Castellanos had described to her mother. Atlas began pawing at the ground near the base of the formation, his claws scraping through decades of accumulated pine needles and forest debris. A low whine escaped his throat, not distress, but focused attention. Rachel's heart was racing now. She dropped her pack and pulled out the collapsible shovel she'd brought, knowing she might need to clear forest debris to find whatever was hidden here. She knelt beside Atlas and began carefully scraping away the layers of organic material. Pine needles. Decomposed leaves. Rich, dark soil. The work was slow, methodical, and Rachel found her hands shaking slightly as she worked. Within 10 minutes, her shovel struck something that definitely wasn't dirt. The sound echoed unnaturally in the quiet forest, a metallic clang that spoke of human construction, of deliberate placement, of secrets buried deep. Working faster now, Rachel exposed what appeared to be a steel hatch approximately 4 feet square. The metal surface was heavily rusted, mottled with decades of oxidation, but still structurally intact. Industrial rivets marked its edges, and a heavy locking mechanism, also rusted but recognizable as a wheel lock design, secured one side. This wasn't a mine shaft. Mine shafts didn't have steel doors with industrial locking mechanisms. This wasn't an old cabin root cellar or food storage. This was something else entirely. Rachel sat back on her heels, staring at what she'd uncovered. The door looked like something from an industrial facility or military installation. The steel was thick, at least a 1/4 inch, possibly more. The rivets were industrial grade. This had been built to last, built to seal something away permanently. The moment of decision. Every instinct screamed that opening this door would change everything. She could walk away right now. Hike back down to her jeep, drive to the sheriff's office in town, report what she'd found. Let someone else handle whatever lay beneath. It would be the sensible thing to do. The safe thing. But her mother's face flashed through her mind. Not the skeletal, pain-ravaged face from those final weeks, but Elena as she'd been before the cancer, strong, determined, laughing as she identified wildflowers along a trail, teaching Rachel the names of plants and birds and geological formations. Promise me you'll find out why. Rachel reached for the wheel lock mechanism, testing its strength. The rust was severe, coating the metal in flaking red-brown scales, but the underlying mechanism still felt solid. She'd need tools, a pry bar at minimum, possibly bolt cutters if the lock had an internal bolt mechanism. She stood and turned toward her pack, planning to retrieve the tools she'd brought for exactly this possibility. That's when Atlas's behavior changed. The German shepherd's ears swiveled toward the trail they'd taken to reach this spot. A low growl began rumbling in his chest, not the playful sound he made when chasing squirrels, but the serious, warning growl that meant potential threat. Rachel froze, listening. At first, she heard nothing beyond the normal sounds of the forest, wind in the pine branches, the distant call of a raven, the creak of trees swaying. But then, faintly, she detected what Atlas's superior hearing had already identified. Footsteps. Someone moving through the forest. Not trying to be particularly quiet, not crashing through the undergrowth, but moving with the steady rhythm of someone who knew where they were going. Coming this way. Rachel's mind raced. This was wilderness land, yes, but it wasn't unusual to encounter other hikers, especially on a beautiful March day when winter was loosening its grip. It could be perfectly innocent, another nature lover, a wildlife photographer, someone from the Forest Service doing trail maintenance. But the timing felt deeply wrong. Rachel had told no one where she was going. The trailhead parking area had been empty when she arrived. This section of the wilderness saw maybe a dozen visitors all year. It was too remote, too difficult to access for casual hikers. The footsteps grew closer. Atlas's growl intensified, his stance shifting into something more aggressive, protective. Rachel had never seen him react this way to approaching hikers before. "Atlas, heel," she whispered, not wanting to alert whoever was coming that she'd heard them. The dog obeyed reluctantly, moving to her side but maintaining his alert posture, his eyes fixed on the forest in the direction of the approaching sounds. Rachel quickly assessed her situation. She was at least 3 hours from her jeep, in rugged terrain with limited escape routes. The rock formation behind her blocked retreat in one direction. Dense forest surrounded her on the other sides. If whoever was approaching had hostile intentions, she was in a vulnerable position. She considered her options. Hide? But where? The forest here was relatively open beneath the canopy, and she'd disturbed a large area of ground uncovering the steel door. Try to rebury it and leave? No time, and the freshly disturbed earth would be obvious to anyone who came close. Confront whoever was coming? That felt dangerous without knowing their intentions. In the end, the decision was made for her. A figure emerged from the forest approximately 50 yards away, moving with casual confidence through the trees. A man, probably in his 60s, wearing expensive hiking gear that looked barely used. Not the worn, patched clothing of someone who spent serious time in the backcountry, but the kind of pristine outdoor outfit you'd see in a sporting goods catalog. His boots were top of the line but still had the unscuffed look of newness. He wasn't even breathing hard, despite the steep terrain and high elevation. Which meant he hadn't hiked in from the trailhead. There must be another access point, one Rachel didn't know about. The man stopped when he saw her, his expression shifting through surprise to something harder to read. Recognition? Calculation? Morning, he called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. Didn't expect to run into anyone out here. His tone was friendly, but something about it felt wrong. Too casual for the circumstances. Too controlled. Rachel stood slowly, placing herself between Atlas and the stranger. Just doing some hiking, she replied, keeping her voice neutral. Beautiful day for it. The man moved closer, and Rachel could see him more clearly now. Silver hair cut in an expensive style. Tanned face that spoke of someone who spent time outdoors, but in a recreational way rather than the weathered look of someone who worked outside. His eyes were sharp, assessing, taking in every detail of the scene: Rachel, Atlas, the disturbed ground, and almost certainly the exposed steel door behind her. Rachel Torres, right? He said, and that sent a chill down her spine. He knew her name. I'm sorry, do I know you? Rachel asked, her hand moving subtly toward the bear spray clipped to her belt. It was designed for deterring aggressive wildlife, but it would work just as well on aggressive humans if necessary. Not yet. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. But I know quite a bit about you. Wilderness guide. Torres Mountain Adventures. Daughter of the late Elena Torres, who had a lot of questions before she passed. Questions about things that are really better left alone. Atlas's growl intensified, and Rachel had to fight to keep her own voice steady. Who are you? My name is Marcus Blackwood. I'm the Regional Environmental Compliance Director for Cordova Industries. Perhaps you've heard of us? We're the parent company that acquired the assets of several smaller firms back in the 80s and 90s. Including one called Apex Chemical. The name sent ice through Rachel's veins. I see you recognize the name, Blackwood continued, moving a few steps closer. Rachel noticed he kept his hands visible, maintained an unthreatening posture, but there was something predatory in his movements, like a wolf circling prey. What do you want? Rachel demanded. To have a conversation. To explain why opening that door, he gestured toward the exposed steel hatch, would be a very serious mistake. One that could have consequences you haven't fully considered. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. Blackwood's voice hardened slightly. You have no idea what you're dealing with here, Ms. Torres. This isn't some simple case of illegal dumping or cutting corners on environmental regulations. There are legal complexities, issues of national security, complications that go far beyond what your mother understood. National security? Rachel couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. What does a chemical company's illegal waste disposal have to do with national security? Everything, when that chemical company was fulfilling classified defense contracts in the 1980s. Blackwood pulled a slim leather wallet from his jacket and flipped it open to reveal an official-looking ID card. DoD Environmental Remediation Office. Some of what Apex Chemical buried up here relates to classified defense work. Which means you're currently standing at an unauthorized entry point to a secured government site. Rachel's mind reeled. This couldn't be real. Her mother had been investigating corporate pollution, not government conspiracies. I don't believe you. Your belief isn't required. What is required is that you leave this site immediately, forget what you found here, and understand that pursuing this matter further would constitute a federal crime. People are dying, Rachel said, her voice rising with anger she'd been suppressing for 2 years. My mother is dead. 17 people in my community have been diagnosed with rare cancers. And you're telling me to just forget about it because of national security? I'm telling you that the situation is more complicated than you realize, and that there are already people working on proper remediation through appropriate channels. Your interference could actually make things worse. Or you're covering up a crime. Blackwood sighed, a sound of practiced patience. Miss Torres, I'm trying to help you here. You're in over your head. Leave now, and we can all pretend this never happened. Your business is struggling, I understand. Cordova Industries could make a substantial donation to support local businesses affected by the unfortunate health issues in your area. Call it community investment. $50,000, deposited in Torres Mountain Adventures business account by end of week. It was a bribe. Dressed up in corporate language, delivered with a thin veneer of legitimacy, but fundamentally a bribe to make her go away. Rachel thought of her mother, working through pain and chemotherapy to document every case, to search for truth. Thought of the Chin twins, their young lives destroyed by leukemia. Thought of Sarah Whitehorse, the Ute elder who'd spent her final months too weak to even walk the land she'd loved. No, she said firmly. Blackwood's expression hardened. I've tried to be reasonable, Ms. Torres. Don't make this difficult. Is that when the threats start? First the bribe, then the intimidation? It's when I remind you that you're a single woman, alone in the wilderness, 3 hours from help, investigating a secured government site without authorization. Accidents happen in the mountains. People get lost, fall from cliffs, succumb to exposure. Tragic, but not uncommon. The threat was barely veiled now, and Rachel felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Atlas had picked up on her distress, his growl becoming a continuous low rumble. Before Rachel could respond, a new sound cut through the tension, the distinctive rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors, growing rapidly louder. Both Rachel and Blackwood looked up as a black helicopter appeared over the ridgeline, moving fast and low, clearly heading directly for their location. That's my ride, Blackwood said calmly. Last chance, Ms. Torres. Walk away now, take the money, live your life. Or stay and deal with consequences you're not prepared for. The helicopter began its descent toward a small clearing about 100 yards away, the rotor wash bending trees and sending up a storm of pine needles and debris. Rachel made a decision in that moment. She couldn't open the door now, not with Blackwood here, not with whatever resources he represented preparing to shut her down. But she also couldn't walk away. Not after coming this far. She pulled out her phone and took several quick photos of the exposed steel door, of the surrounding terrain, of the rock formation that matched her mother's description. Blackwood saw what she was doing but made no move to stop her, probably because they both knew that without more context, photos of a rusty door in the forest proved nothing. This isn't over, Rachel said. It could be. That's your choice. Blackwood turned and walked toward the landing helicopter. Over his shoulder, he called back, 72 hours, Ms. Torres. That's how long the offer stands. After that, we stop being friendly. Rachel stood her ground, watching as Blackwood boarded the helicopter. Within minutes, it lifted off and disappeared over the ridgeline, the sound of its rotors fading into the distance. Silence returned to the forest, but it felt different now, charged with danger, heavy with implications Rachel was only beginning to understand. She looked down at Atlas, who had finally stopped growling but remained tense, alert. What the hell did Mom uncover, boy? The steel door lay exposed at her feet, its secrets still sealed, but now Rachel knew with absolute certainty that opening it would mean war with forces far more powerful than she'd imagined. The question was, did she have the courage to fight that war? Rachel's hands were still shaking as she navigated her Jeep down the rutted Forest Service road, Atlas sitting alert in the passenger seat, his eyes fixed on her face with that uncanny canine ability to sense distress. The encounter with Marcus Blackwood had rattled her more than she wanted to admit. The casual way he'd threatened her life, the helicopter appearing as if on cue, the mention of national security and classified defense contracts, it all felt surreal, like she'd stumbled into a thriller novel rather than her actual life. But the photos on her phone were real. The steel door was real. Her mother's journal, now secured in a waterproof bag in her backpack, was real. And 17 dead or dying people in Pinecrest Valley were very, very real. The drive back took over an hour, winding down from the high country through layers of ecological zones, from alpine tundra to spruce fir forest, through ponderosa pine groves, finally descending into the valley where scrub oak and juniper marked the transition to lower elevations. The town of Pinecrest Valley sat at 7,800 feet, a collection of weathered buildings clustered along what locals optimistically called Main Street, really just a widened section of the two-lane highway that connected them to the outside world. Rachel drove straight past her converted barn office, past her mother's house where the journal had been hidden for 2 years, and headed instead for the one person in town she trusted completely, Dr. Sarah Whitehorse's granddaughter, Dr. Naomi Whitehorse-Chen. Naomi was one of the Chen twins' older cousins, a molecular biologist who'd earned her PhD from Stanford before returning to the reservation that bordered Pinecrest Valley. She ran a small environmental testing lab, funded partially by tribal resources and partially by grants for studying traditional ecological knowledge. More importantly, she'd been one of the few people who'd taken Elena Torres's concerns seriously, who'd tested water samples and soil samples at cost when Elena couldn't afford commercial lab fees. If anyone could help Rachel figure out what to do next, it was Naomi. Naomi's lab. The lab occupied a converted garage behind Naomi's modest house on the Ute reservation land. Rachel had been here dozens of times over the years, sometimes for legitimate water quality testing for her guiding business, sometimes just to share coffee and conversation with one of the few people in the valley who didn't treat her mother's cancer crusade as the desperate paranoia of a dying woman. Naomi answered the door before Rachel even knocked, clearly having heard the Jeep pull up. She was in her early 40s, with the kind of ageless face that made her age impossible to guess, her black hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing jeans and a Stanford sweatshirt that had seen better days. "Rachel? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Can we talk inside? And do you have something to give Atlas? He's been incredible today, but he missed lunch." 10 minutes later, they were seated at Naomi's kitchen table while Atlas contentedly devoured a bowl of high-quality dog food that Naomi kept stocked for exactly these occasions. Rachel had spread out her mother's journal, her phone with the photos, and a printout of the topographic map she'd marked with the site location. Naomi listened without interruption as Rachel recounted the morning's events, her dark eyes growing increasingly concerned as the story unfolded. When Rachel described Marcus Blackwood's threats in the helicopter extraction, Naomi actually stood up and paced to the window, staring out at the mountain landscape as if seeing it differently now. "Apex Chemical," she said finally. "I remember that name from my grandmother's stories. She and some of the other elders tried to stop them from building that facility back in the 70s. Said the environmental impact studies were incomplete, that the site was too close to sacred springs, that the water table connections weren't properly mapped. What happened? What always happens? Jobs versus environment, progress versus tradition. The facility got built. My grandmother and the others were dismissed as superstitious Indians standing in the way of economic development." Naomi's voice was bitter. "And now we know they were right all along." Rachel pulled up the photos on her phone, zooming in on the steel door. "What do you think they buried up there? Based on what Apex Chemical manufactured? Could be anything. Industrial solvents, heavy metals, PCBs, pesticide intermediates, chemical waste from classified defense contracts." Naomi returned to the table, studying the photo intently. That's not a temporary storage container. That's engineered for permanent burial. Whatever's down there, they never intended anyone to find it. Blackwood offered me $50,000 to forget about it. Naomi looked up sharply. Did he? And when I refused, he basically threatened to arrange an accident in the wilderness. That's conspiracy to commit murder. You should go to the sheriff. Rachel laughed bitterly. Sheriff Martinez? Who's been dismissing concerns about the cancer cluster for 5 years? Who told my mother she was harassing local officials when she kept asking questions? Martinez either doesn't care or is already compromised. FBI then. EPA. Someone federal who can't be bought off by local interests. With what evidence? Photos of a rusty door? My mother's journal documenting one conversation with a dead man? Blackwood already claimed it's a secured government site. For all I know, he has legitimate credentials. One phone call from his office to federal agencies, and I become the problem, the conspiracy theorist trespassing on classified government property. Naomi sat back, frustration evident on her face. So what's your plan? You can't just leave it alone, not after what you found. But you also can't open that door yourself. If Blackwood is watching, and I guarantee he is, they'll stop you before you get anywhere. I need more evidence. More context. I need to understand what Apex Chemical was really doing up there, what they were manufacturing, what defense contracts they held. I need documentation that proves whatever's buried there is illegal, not some classified but legitimate government operation. That's going to be hard to find. Companies like Apex are careful about records, especially when they're doing something illegal. And if there really is a classified defense angle, good luck getting through national security restrictions. Rachel nodded slowly, an idea forming. What about the people who work there? Not management who signed NDAs and took severance packages, but regular employees. Maintenance workers, truck drivers, people who saw things but weren't important enough to buy off permanently. Your mother tried that. She talked to Henry Castellanos before he died. Are there others? I don't know, but there have to be. A chemical facility that operated for 9 years must have employed dozens, maybe hundreds of people. Some of them have to still be alive, still living in the region. Maybe some of them are sick too, dealing with their own cancers and wondering why. Naomi considered this. It's worth trying. But Rachel, you need to be careful. Blackwood knew who you were, knew about your mother's investigation. They've been watching. If you start making inquiries, interviewing former employees, they'll know. Let them know. Maybe that forces their hand, makes them do something that exposes them. Or makes them eliminate the threat more permanently. Naomi's voice was sharp with concern. These aren't people who make idle threats. Your mother spent months investigating, and she never found that door. How did Blackwood know you'd found it within hours? They're either monitoring that site remotely, or they have someone watching who reported it immediately. The implication sent a chill through Rachel. Remote sensors? Probably. Motion detectors, cameras, seismic sensors to detect digging. If this is really classified, that site would have security measures we can't see. Which means they knew the moment you started uncovering that door. Rachel thought about the timing. She'd been at the site for maybe 20 minutes before Blackwood appeared. Even with helicopter transport, he'd have needed advance warning to arrive that quickly. Which meant Naomi was right, they were actively monitoring the location. So what do? I can't investigate without them knowing. I can't open the door without them stopping me. I can't go to authorities without proof they're not already compromised. Naomi was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. Then she stood and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner of the kitchen, rummaging through packed files until she extracted a thin folder. After your mother died, I kept investigating on my own. Quietly, carefully, using tribal environmental monitoring programs as cover. I've been testing water and soil samples from various locations around the valley, mapping contamination patterns, looking for source points. She spread several maps across the table, overlaid with colored markers indicating test results. Look at this. These red dots are sites with elevated levels of chlorinated solvents, specifically trichloroethylene and perchloroethylene. These blue dots show heavy metal contamination, cadmium, lead, chromium. The green dots indicate elevated levels of organic compounds consistent with pesticide manufacturing. Rachel studied the maps. The contamination wasn't random. It followed clear patterns, radiating out from specific source points. Where's the Apex chemical facility? Naomi pointed to a location south of the valley. Here. And you can see contamination spreading from it, following the groundwater flow. But look at these other concentration points. She indicated several areas in the high country, including one very close to where Rachel had found the steel door. These suggest multiple disposal sites, not just the official facility. They were dumping in the mountains. Repeatedly and systematically. I've documented at least 6 separate contamination signatures that don't trace back to the main facility. They were using the wilderness as an illegal dumping ground, probably figuring that the remote locations, the rugged terrain, and the passage of time would hide the evidence forever. Rachel felt anger building in her chest. How many people know about this? Just me, until now. I've been trying to build a comprehensive case before going public. I've contacted environmental lawyers, started documenting everything according to EPA standards, collected witness statements from tribal elders who remember the Apex years. But it's slow, and I'm one person working alone. Not anymore. Rachel looked up from the maps. I have my mother's journal, which includes Henry Castellanos' testimony. I have photos of at least one disposal site. I have your contamination studies. That's a starting point. It's not enough. We need smoking gun evidence, documentation from Apex Chemical itself, testimony from multiple witnesses, proof of direct causation between the dumping and the cancer cases. And we need to be able to present it in a way that can't be suppressed or dismissed. Rachel stood and began pacing, her mind working through possibilities. What if we don't go through official channels? What if we go public first, make it too visible to suppress? Media? Media, social media, environmental groups, legal advocacy organizations. We flood the zone with information, make this story big enough and public enough that it can't be quietly disappeared. Naomi looked skeptical. That's risky. If we go public without ironclad evidence, we look like conspiracy theorists. Blackwood and Cordova Industries will have PR firms and lawyers who can destroy our credibility before we finish talking. And if we're wrong about anything, any detail, any connection, they'll use that to discredit everything. Then we need to make sure we're not wrong. We need to build an airtight case before we go public. Which brings us back to the same problem, we need more evidence, which means more investigation, which means Blackwood and whoever he works for will see us coming. Rachel stopped pacing, a new thought occurring to her. Unless we divide their attention. If I'm the visible threat, the one they're watching and trying to manage, maybe others can investigate without drawing the same scrutiny. Others like who? I don't know yet. But there have to be people in this valley who are angry about what's happened, who want answers, who'd be willing to help if they knew there was a real chance at justice. Before Naomi could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming text. She glanced at it, and her expression changed immediately. It's from my cousin at the tribal council offices. He says 2 federal agents just showed up, asking questions about environmental testing and who's been conducting unauthorized studies on federal land. Rachel and Naomi looked at each other. That was fast, Rachel said. Too fast. They were already here, already prepared to shut down investigation. This wasn't reactive, it was planned. Which means Blackwood wasn't bluffing about the national security angle. If they can mobilize federal agents this quickly, they have real government connections. Naomi quickly began gathering her contamination maps and study results, shoving them back into the filing cabinet. You need to leave. If they come here and find you, it connects us publicly. Better if I can maintain plausible deniability, just a tribal scientist doing routine environmental monitoring. What about you? Are you in danger? I'm on reservation land, and I'm conducting legally authorized environmental studies under tribal sovereignty. That gives me some protection. But you're a civilian who is trespassing on federal land and photographing a secured site. You're much more vulnerable. Rachel grabbed her mother's journal and her phone. Atlas, sensing the sudden urgency, stood from his resting place and moved to her side. I'll call you when it's safe. Be careful, Rachel. And whatever you do, don't go back to that site alone. If you're right about what's buried there, and if Blackwood is willing to kill to protect it, you're marked now. They know you won't let this go. Finding allies. Rachel spent the rest of the day moving carefully, avoiding her office and her mother's house, staying in public places where sudden violence would be witnessed. She parked her Jeep at the library, a small stone building that had been donated to the town by a wealthy mining family in 1912 and now served as one of the few truly public gathering spaces in Pinecrest Valley. The head librarian, Margaret Reeves, had been one of Elena Torres's friends, one of the few people who'd believed her mother's concerns had merit. If anyone in town would know who else might be willing to help, it would be Margaret. Rachel found her in the back office, surrounded by tottering stacks of books waiting to be cataloged and returned to shelves. Margaret was in her late 60s, a widow who'd moved to Pinecrest Valley 20 years ago seeking peace and isolation after her husband's death. She'd found community instead, and had become the kind of informal town historian that small places produce, someone who knows everyone, remembers everything, and can connect disparate threads of information into coherent patterns. Rachel Torres. Margaret looked up from her computer, her expression shifting immediately to concern. I heard you were asking questions up in the high country. Word travels fast in a small town. How did you hear that? Jim Nakamura's grandson works for the Forest Service. He mentioned seeing helicopter activity in a restricted area this morning, right around the time someone reported a civilian vehicle at the trailhead access point. Wasn't hard to put two and two together, especially given your mother's research. Margaret gestured to a chair. Sit. Tell me what you found. Rachel sat, suddenly exhausted from the adrenaline crash. Atlas settled at her feet, his head on his paws but his eyes still alert. She gave Margaret an abbreviated version of the morning's events, watching the older woman's expression shift from concern to grim satisfaction. So Elena was right. There is something up there. Buried hazardous waste, probably. Naomi Whitehorsejan has contamination studies that support it. But I can't prove it without opening that door, and I can't open it without getting shut down by people with significant resources and government connections. Margaret was quiet for a moment, her fingers drumming on the desk in a familiar gesture Rachel remembered from countless library visits in her childhood. Finally, she said, you need witnesses. Not just for what's in that door, but for everything, the investigation, the threats, the cover-up attempt. You need documentation that can't be disappeared. I know. But who? Most people in this town are either too scared to get involved or don't believe there's anything to investigate. Most, yes. But not all. Margaret turned to her computer and pulled up what appeared to be a spreadsheet. After your mother passed, I started keeping records. Nothing official, just personal documentation. Names of people who've gotten sick, their symptoms, their histories. I also noted who'd worked for Apex Chemical, who'd raised concerns over the years, who seemed like they might be willing to help if someone ever put together a real investigation. She rotated the screen so Rachel could see. The spreadsheet contained dozens of names, with notes beside each entry. Some were marked with red highlights, deceased. Others had green highlights, potentially willing to help. Still others were marked in yellow, uncertain or potentially compromised. This is incredible, Rachel breathed, scanning the names. She recognized many of them, neighbors, former classmates' parents, people she'd passed on the street for years without knowing their connection to the larger pattern. I've been waiting for someone to do something with this information, Margaret said quietly. Your mother tried, but she was sick, and people knew she was sick. They thought it was desperation, the need to find meaning in a senseless disease. But you're healthy, you're young, and you have nothing to gain from pursuing this except justice. People might listen to you. Rachel thought about Marcus Blackwood's threats, about federal agents showing up at the reservation, about the resources arrayed against her. Or I might end up dead like my mother, with everyone believing it was an accident. That's a risk. But it's also why you need allies, people who know what you're doing and can raise alarm if something happens to you. Silence is their best weapon. Visibility is yours. Margaret printed out the spreadsheet and handed it to Rachel. Start with the green highlighted names. I've noted which ones lost family members to the cancer cluster, which ones worked for Apex, which ones are activists or lawyers or journalists. Build your coalition carefully, but build it quickly. The more people who know what you're investigating, the harder it becomes to silence all of you. Rachel folded the papers carefully and tucked them into her jacket. Thank you, Margaret. This means everything. Thank your mother. She started this, mapped the pattern, asked the questions no one else would ask. You're just finishing what she began. The first recruit. The first name on Margaret's green highlighted list was Robert Chen, father of the Chen twins who'd both died from leukemia within a year of each other. He lived on the eastern edge of town in a small house that had once been filled with life and noise, 2 teenage boys, a busy medical practice, a wife who taught at the elementary school. Now it was silent, its windows dark even in late afternoon, with the kind of abandoned feeling that came from grief so profound it consumed everything else. Rachel almost didn't knock. What right did she have to reopen this man's wounds, to ask him to relive the worst trauma of his life for the sake of an investigation that might lead nowhere? But she thought of her mother's promise, of the steel door waiting in the mountains, of Marcus Blackwood's casual threats. If there was even a chance that exposing the truth could prevent other families from suffering the same losses, she had to try. Robert Chen answered on the third knock, looking older than Rachel remembered. He'd been a vigorous man in his 50s when the twins got sick, a family physician who'd built a successful practice serving the valley's scattered population. Now, barely 4 years later, he looked ancient, gray-faced, hollow-eyed, moving with the careful precision of someone held together by will alone. Rachel Torres. His voice was raspy, underused. I heard about your mother. I'm sorry. Thank you, Dr. Chen. I'm sorry to bother you, but I was hoping we could talk. It's about the cancer cases, about what might have caused them. Something flickered in Chen's eyes, interest, or maybe just the recognition of shared pain. He stepped back from the door. Come in. The interior of the house was neat but lifeless, like a museum display of a home rather than a living space. Photos of the twins covered every surface, school pictures, sports team photos, family vacations frozen in time. Rachel had to force herself not to stare at those images of vibrant life extinguished far too soon. They sat in the living room, and Rachel explained everything: her mother's investigation, the journal, Henry Castellanos' deathbed confession, the steel door, Marcus Blackwood's threats, Naomi's contamination studies. She held nothing back, sensing that Chen deserved the full truth, the complete picture of what they were up against. When she finished, Chen sat in silence for a long time, his gaze fixed on a photo of his sons in Little League uniforms, both grinning at the camera with gap-toothed smiles. I knew, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Not the details, not about Apex Chemical specifically. But I knew their leukemia wasn't natural, wasn't random chance. The cellular markers, the progression, the resistance to treatment, everything about their disease suggested environmental exposure to carcinogens, not genetic predisposition or viral factors. Did you tell the state investigators? Of course. I documented everything, gave them my medical analysis, urged them to look at environmental factors. They nodded, took notes, and ultimately did nothing. Said the evidence was inconclusive, that leukemia clusters happen randomly, that correlation doesn't prove causation. The bitterness in his voice was absolute, corrosive. Rachel understood it completely. I have a chance to prove causation, she said. But I need help. I need people willing to go on record, to share their stories, to demand accountability even when it's dangerous to do so. Chen looked at her directly for the first time since she'd arrived. What exactly are you asking me to do? Help me document everything. You're a physician, your medical analysis carries weight that mine doesn't. Help me connect the cancer cases to the contamination patterns. Help me build a case so airtight that even government connections and corporate lawyers can't dismiss it. And if that makes me a target? If Blackwood and whoever he represents decide I'm a threat that needs to be eliminated? Then we make sure enough people know what we're doing that eliminating us all becomes impossible. We create so much visibility that the cover-up becomes more dangerous than the exposure. Chen stood and walked to the mantel, picking up a framed photo of his family, him, his wife, the twins, all smiling at some forgotten celebration. His hand trembled slightly as he held it. My wife left me 6 months after the boys died, he said quietly. She couldn't look at me anymore, couldn't be in this house, couldn't exist in a world where our children were gone. She moved to California to be near her sister. We haven't spoken since. He set the photo down and turned to face Rachel. I have nothing left to lose. They took everything that mattered. So yes, I'll help you. I'll document every case, every symptom, every pattern. I'll testify, I'll go on record, I'll do whatever needs to be done. Because if there's even a chance that exposing these bastards prevents another family from suffering what mine did, then it's worth any risk. Rachel felt tears prickling her eyes. Thank you, Dr. Chen. Call me Robert. And thank you for finishing what your mother started. Elena Torres was the only person besides me who seemed to understand that our children deserve justice, not just sympathy. Building the team. Over the next 3 days, Rachel worked her way through Margaret's list, approaching each potential ally carefully, explaining the situation, asking for help. Not everyone said yes. Some were too frightened, too beaten down by years of official dismissals and community skepticism. Others simply couldn't afford to make themselves targets, they had families to protect, jobs they couldn't risk, lives that couldn't withstand the kind of scrutiny and danger that fighting powerful interests would bring. But enough said yes. Maria Gonzalez, whose husband had died from brain cancer at 43, leaving her with 3 children and a mountain of medical debt. She was a paralegal, and she offered to help research Apex Chemicals' corporate structure, track down former employees, dig through public records for any information that might have been filed and forgotten. Thomas Whitehorse, Naomi's uncle and a former tribal police officer who'd been forced into early retirement after raising too many questions about contamination on reservation land. He offered security expertise, someone who could watch Rachel's back, who understood surveillance and counter-surveillance, who could help keep the investigation team safe. Jennifer Park, a young journalist who'd moved to the Valley 2 years ago to work for the local newspaper but had quickly become frustrated by the paper's refusal to investigate controversial stories that might alienate advertisers or anger powerful interests. She offered media connections, the ability to get their story to outlets that couldn't be easily pressured or bought off. Marcus Stillwater, an environmental lawyer based in Denver who'd been following the Pinecrest Valley cancer cluster for years, waiting for enough evidence to justify taking on a major case. He offered legal expertise, knowledge of environmental law and corporate liability, and connections to other lawyers who specialized in toxic tort cases. By the end of the 3rd day, Rachel had assembled a team of 8 people, each bringing different skills and perspectives, all united by personal loss or professional commitment to environmental justice. They met in Margaret's library after hours, spreading out maps and documents and contamination studies across tables meant for casual readers, transforming a space of quiet learning into a war room for their investigation. This is good, Marcus Stillwater said, reviewing Naomi's data. The contamination patterns are clear, the statistical analysis is solid. This kind of multi-year study from a credentialed scientist carries significant weight. But we need more. We need proof of what's buried at that site, and we need documentation from Apex Chemicals showing they knew they were dumping hazardous waste illegally. How do we get that documentation? Jennifer Park asked. Companies don't typically keep detailed records of their crimes. Actually, they do, Maria Gonzalez interjected. Environmental regulations require extensive paperwork, manifests for hazardous waste transportation, disposal site permits, chemical inventory records. Even if they were violating those regulations, they'd have had to create false documentation to cover their tracks. Those false records, if we can find them, prove criminal intent. Where would those records be now? Rachel asked. That's the challenge, Marcus Stillwater replied. When Apex Chemical closed the Durango facility in 1987, they were required to transfer all environmental compliance records to the EPA and state environmental agencies. But if they were creating false documentation, the real records, the ones showing what they actually did versus what they reported, would have been kept separately, probably destroyed, or hidden somewhere they thought no one would ever look. Like buried in the mountains along with the waste itself? Everyone turned to look at Rachel. Think about it, she continued, her mind working through the possibility. If you're running an illegal disposal operation, you need records, manifests showing what you buried where, chemical composition data, maybe even photos documenting the disposal sites. You keep those records hidden because destroying them entirely is risky. What if someone finds the waste years later and you need to be able to prove what's there, for liability purposes or cleanup planning? So you keep the records, but you hide them somewhere they can't be found without your knowledge, Thomas Whitehorse finished. Somewhere you control access to. Somewhere that if anyone does find it, you know immediately. Like an underground bunker protected by motion sensors and surveillance equipment, Naomi added. With remote monitoring that alerts you the moment someone tries to access it. Robert Chen leaned forward, his expression intense. You're saying the evidence we need might be buried at the same site you found. Not just hazardous waste, but documentation of everything Apex Chemical did. It makes sense, Marcus Stillwater said slowly. From a corporate liability perspective, you'd want to preserve records even of illegal activity, just in case you needed leverage or evidence for your own protection. But you'd want them hidden and secured. A remote mountain site, sealed in a weatherproof container, monitored remotely, it's actually brilliant in a twisted way. Which means we need to open that door, Rachel concluded. Not just to expose the waste, but to find the evidence that proves the conspiracy. And how do we do that with Blackwood and his people watching? Jennifer asked. The moment you approach that site, they'll know. The moment you start trying to open that door, they'll stop you. The room fell silent as everyone grappled with the central problem. They had theory, they had circumstantial evidence, they had personal testimony and contamination studies. But without smoking gun documentation, without proof that would stand up in court and couldn't be explained away, they had nothing that would force accountability. Thomas Whitehorse spoke into the silence. We create a diversion. Something big enough to draw their attention away from the mountain site, at least temporarily. Something that makes them commit resources elsewhere. Like what? Like a very public, very visible, very controversial protest or direct action. Something that makes the cover-up itself the story, that forces media attention, that makes Blackwood and Cordoba Industries respond to public pressure rather than dealing with us quietly. Jennifer Park's eyes lit up. I can make that happen. I have contacts with environmental advocacy groups, indigenous rights organizations, media outlets that specialize in corporate accountability stories. If we give them enough information to run with, not everything, but enough to be credible and newsworthy, we can create a media firestorm. And while they're dealing with that, managing PR damage and legal responses, a small team goes to the mountain site and opens that door, Rachel finished. It's risky, Marcus Stillwater warned. If the diversion fails, if they see through it, or if they have enough people to handle both the public relations crisis and stop the site access, we end up with nothing except having shown our hand. We're out of low-risk options, Rachel replied. Blackwood gave me 72 hours to accept his bribe. That deadline passed yesterday. As far as they're concerned, I'm already a problem that needs to be dealt with. At this point, being bold might actually be safer than being cautious. The group debated for another hour, refining the plan, identifying risks, assigning roles. Finally, as midnight approached, they reached consensus. Phase 1, Jennifer would leak information about the cancer cluster and possible toxic waste cover-up to her media contacts, along with just enough details about the mountain site to make the story credible but not revealing its exact location. This would happen in 2 days, giving them time to prepare. Phase 2, environmental groups would organize protests at Corteva Industries headquarters in Denver, demanding transparency and accountability. Indigenous rights organizations would file formal complaints about sacred site contamination. Local residents would speak to media about their health concerns. The goal was maximum noise and attention, forcing Blackwood and his team to respond publicly. Phase 3, while that chaos unfolded, Rachel, Thomas, Naomi, and Robert would make another attempt at the mountain site, this time with proper equipment to open the steel door and document whatever they found. Thomas would handle security and surveillance detection. Naomi would conduct immediate environmental sampling. Robert would document health implications. Rachel would photograph and video everything. If we find what we think is there, evidence of illegal dumping and documentation of the conspiracy, we immediately transmit it to multiple secure locations, Marcus explained. Cloud storage, distributed to various journalists and lawyers, filed with federal agencies. We make it impossible to suppress or disappear. And if something goes wrong? Maria asked quietly. Then at least we'll have gone down fighting, Rachel replied. And we'll have generated enough public attention that if any of us end up hurt or dead, it can't be quietly dismissed as accidents. As the meeting broke up and people prepared to leave, Rachel found herself standing with Margaret Reeves by the library's front door. Your mother would be proud, Margaret said quietly. She'd also be terrified for you, but proud. I'm terrified for me too, Rachel admitted. But I can't stop now. Not when we're this close. Just promise me something. Whatever happens up there, whatever you find, you'll make sure the truth gets told. That's what matters. Not revenge, not punishment, but truth. The families who've suffered deserve at least that much. Rachel squeezed the older woman's hand. I promise. As she walked to her Jeep with Atlas at her side, Rachel looked up at the mountains rising black against the star-filled sky. Somewhere up there, buried beneath rock and soil and 40 years of silence, lay answers that powerful people had killed to protect. In 48 hours, she would know what those answers were. Or she'd be dead trying to find them. 48 hours later, Rachel woke to her phone exploding with notifications. Jennifer Park's carefully orchestrated media leak had gone viral overnight. The Denver Post ran a front-page story, Mountain Community Cancer Cluster, New Evidence Points to Corporate Cover-Up. National environmental organizations demanded EPA investigation. The story had captured national attention. By mid-morning, Corteva Industries issued a corporate statement denying all allegations. But the fact they'd responded at all meant the pressure was working. Phase 1 successful, Jennifer reported during a conference call. Environmental groups are organizing protests at their Denver headquarters tomorrow. The tribe filed formal complaints with the EPA. Thomas Whitehorse reported surveillance vehicles circling Rachel's properties. They want you to know you're being watched. Tomorrow afternoon, the protests start, Thomas explained. That's when we move on the mountain site. After the call, Rachel's phone rang. Unknown number. Ms. Torres. Marcus Blackwood's voice carried underlying tension. I see you decided not to accept my offer. I don't negotiate with people who threaten my life. I'm calling with a new offer. Information. You think you know what's buried up there, simple corporate crimes. But you're wrong. What Apex Chemical was doing was far more complex. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Meet me. I'll tell you everything, why exposing it could have consequences beyond your valley. Why would you do that? Because this is escalating beyond control. There are people involved who make my employers look benevolent. People who won't hesitate to do whatever necessary to keep this buried. Rachel's mind raced. This could be a trap. But something in his voice suggested genuine concern. Where and when? The old mining museum. 2 hours. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to prevent something worse. The revelation. 2 hours later, Rachel met Blackwood at the abandoned museum. Thomas watched from a distance as backup. Inside, Blackwood looked exhausted. I'm about to violate multiple NDAs and end my career. But letting this play out could end much worse. He opened his laptop, showing declassified government documents. In 1982, the Department of Defense contracted with Apex Chemical to manufacture chemical agents for the Binary Chemical Weapons Program. During the Cold War, we developed weapons with separated toxic components. Apex manufactured precursor compounds. He showed chemical formulas. The manufacturing created toxic byproducts, hazardous and classified. Standard disposal wouldn't work because it would reveal classified programs. So the DoD authorized secure disposal at remote locations. The mountain sites, Rachel said. 3 of them. What you found contains precursor chemicals, manufacturing byproducts, and contaminated equipment. It was supposed to remain stable for centuries. But it leaked. It leaked. The containers were built to 1980 specs. No one anticipated seismic activity, groundwater flow, freeze-thaw cycles. By the early 2000s, we knew there was contamination. The decision was made to monitor rather than remediate. Why? Because remediation meant admitting what was buried. Revealing classified Cold War programs. Creating international incidents, treaty violations, congressional investigations. They prioritized avoiding political fallout over protecting public health. Rachel felt rage building. So you let people die. You watched my mother waste away, watched children suffer, and did nothing. I didn't make those decisions. I was brought in 5 years ago to contain information. Then why tell me now? Blackwood showed her emails marked with high-level security classifications. Authorization for permanent resolution. Instructions to eliminate ongoing threats. References to terminal solutions. They're planning to kill us, Rachel whispered. You, your team, anyone who could testify. Made to look like accidents. I signed up to protect secrets, not murder citizens. There's a line, and they'd asked me to cross it. I won't. What do you want? I want you to stop. Take your team and disappear. I can buy you 48 hours. It's the only way you survive. Rachel paced the dusty floor. By running away? Abandoning families still getting sick? That's not salvation, that's surrender. You're not the hero. You're an ordinary person in over your head. Your refusal to recognize that will get you killed. Maybe. But I'll die fighting for something that matters. Rachel headed for the door, then paused. The documentation, the records, the proof. Is that in the bunker at the site I found? Blackwood's face gave her the answer. If you try to access that site tomorrow, you won't make it down alive. Then we'll see who's more determined. The final preparation. Rachel called an emergency meeting and recounted Blackwood's warnings. The team's faces shifted from shock to determination. He could be lying, Thomas said. Psychological warfare. Or telling the truth, Marcus Stillwater countered. Chemical weapons programs, classified contracts, that's credible. Does it change what we're doing? Naomi asked. My sons are still dead, Robertson said flatly. Knowing the government was involved makes it more important to expose, not less. One by one, the others agreed to proceed. Thomas outlined a modified plan. We take separate routes, arrive from different directions. If they stop one, the others continue. And we live stream everything. Marcus Stillwater pulled out equipment. Satellite cameras that can't be easily jammed. Everything uploads in real time to servers in 3 countries. Dead man switches trigger if your heartbeat monitors stop, automatic data dump to WikiLeaks, news organizations, congressional committees. They can't eliminate you quietly if your deaths trigger an information avalanche, Marcus explained. The team spent the day testing equipment. As evening fell, Rachel stood in Margaret's garden with Atlas, staring at the mountains. Tomorrow she would open that door and expose the truth. Or die trying. "I'm going to find out, Mom," she whispered. "Whatever it costs." The mountain operation. Dawn broke clear and cold. Rachel drove alone, the dashboard camera already streaming. Thomas approached from the north. Naomi from the east. Robert from the south. They would converge simultaneously. Jennifer reported from Denver. Protests had started early with over 200 people. Media coverage was extensive. The diversion was working. Rachel began the hike with Atlas, activating her chest-mounted camera. This is Rachel Torres. March 15, 7:30 a.m. I'm hiking to a site where I discovered a sealed underground bunker. Based on multiple sources, this site contains illegally disposed hazardous waste and documentation of classified defense programs. Our goal is to open it, document what we find, and ensure the information reaches authorities and the public. The 3-hour hike was beautiful but unsettling. The forest felt too quiet, too still. Atlas sensed it, his body tense. She reached the clearing to find Thomas already there, surveying with tactical thoroughness. Site appears clear. No obvious surveillance, but it's probably there. Naomi arrived with testing equipment. Robert came last, exhausted but determined. The steel door waited exactly as Rachel had left it. "Let's see what 40 years of secrets look like," Thomas said, pulling out a cutting torch. The cutting took nearly an hour. Finally, the lock gave way with a grinding crack. The wheel lock turned. The door lifted smoothly. Stale air rushed out, smelling of metal and chemicals and time. Thomas descended first, his camera transmitting images of the bunker, a rectangular room lined with industrial shelving, metal drums, storage containers, filing cabinets with drawers partially open. "It's clear. Air quality seems okay, but use respirators. Come down carefully." One by one, they descended into the bunker Apex Chemical had built and sealed 40 years ago. Rachel's camera captured everything. The drums of chemicals with faded labels. Filing cabinets full of documents. And in the back corner, a safe that Thomas worked to open. Inside, comprehensive records of the classified defense program. Documentation of every drum of waste, every disposal operation, every contamination incident Apex had detected and concealed. Internal memos about choosing remote burial over proper disposal. Cost-benefit analyses valuing secrecy over statistical health impacts. Most damning, recent documents from the past decade. Contamination monitoring showing Cordova Industries and government partners knew about the leaking containers, knew about health impacts, knew about the cancer cluster, and deliberately chose concealment over remediation. Robert Chin read medical monitoring reports, hands shaking. They've been tracking cancer rates since 2010. They knew exactly what was causing it and did nothing. They watched us die. Naomi took samples. This will take years to clean up. According to these records, there are 2 more sites, both leaking, both contaminating groundwater feeding multiple communities. Rachel stood surrounded by evidence of conspiracy so vast and cruel it stole her breath. "We got it. We got everything we needed." That's when the explosion happened. The standoff. The blast came from above, not collapsing the bunker but showering debris down the entrance shaft. The ladder twisted, several rungs tearing free. "They've sealed us in," Thomas said grimly. "Calculated to trap us, not kill us. At least not yet." Rachel's phone still had signal. Messages flooded in, federal agents raiding the Denver protests, searching homes in Pinecrest Valley under national security warrants. The crackdown had begun. "Keep streaming," Thomas instructed. "Our visibility is our only protection." A voice echoed from above, amplified and authoritative. "This is a federal security operation. You are trespassing on a classified site. Cease documentation and prepare for custody." Rachel climbed the damaged ladder as far as possible. We're conducting legitimate environmental investigation. We've documented massive environmental crimes. Proof of illegal chemical weapons waste disposal. Evidence of deliberate cover-up of health impacts. This is live-streamed. Thousands are watching. Your streams are jammed. All signals blocked. Surrender or be forcibly extracted. Rachel checked, standard feeds frozen. But Thomas was smiling grimly. They blocked cellular and Wi-Fi. The satellite uplinks use different frequencies. We're still transmitting. We have evidence of criminal conspiracy. Rachel shouted. Documentation of classified programs violating chemical weapons treaties. Proof agencies knew about contamination causing cancer and chose concealment. Medical monitoring showing deliberate decisions to let people die. All being transmitted now. Long silence above. Then, materials at this site are classified for legitimate national security. Releasing that information constitutes espionage. You'll be charged under the Espionage Act if you don't cease and surrender. Robert Chen pushed past Rachel, face transformed by rage and grief. My children died because of what's here. 17 families lost loved ones to cancer caused by your classified materials. You call it national security, I call it murder. Choosing political convenience over human lives. Letting children die to avoid embarrassment. His voice cracked with 2 years of grief. Another long silence. Finally, Marcus Blackwood spoke, sounding defeated. Ms. Torres, I warned you. This is your last chance. Stop transmitting, come out peacefully, you'll be treated fairly. Continue, and this moves beyond my authority to people who don't negotiate. We're not negotiating, Rachel replied steadily. We're exposing truth about environmental crimes, about people who died because powerful interests chose secrecy over safety. Whether you kill or arrest or bury us, the evidence is already out there. You can't suppress it anymore. It's too late. The truth is spreading. The turning point. The live streams had continued despite jamming. Thousands watched the descent, the evidence discovery, the threats. They'd seen the chemical drums, the documents, the proof of conspiracy. And those viewers acted. Social media exploded. Clips of Robert Chen's testimony went viral. Images of chemical storage, screenshots of internal memos, all spreading faster than any organization could contain. Environmental groups mobilized. Legal advocates filed emergency injunctions. Members of Congress demanded explanations. Journalists pivoted from local interest to national scandal. Within an hour, the federal agents above received new orders. The situation had escaped containment. The bunker confrontation was national news. Satellite trucks were en route. Sheriff's deputies responding to explosion reports were approaching. Too many witnesses, too much exposure, too much evidence already distributed. After 90 tense minutes, a different voice spoke from above, more official, more bureaucratic, more defeated. A rope ladder is being lowered. Ascend one at a time. Surrender equipment for evidence processing. Transport to federal facility for debriefing. Legal representation allowed. No charges filed at this time pending investigation. Not an apology. Not accountability. But acknowledgement they've lost the ability to simply disappear the problem. One by one, they climbed out. Atlas nearly knocked Rachel over with relieved greeting. Federal agents in hazmat suits descended to secure evidence, following protocols now that everything was public. Marcus Blackwood stood aside, no longer confrontational but looking like a man caught between impossible orders and conscience. He met Rachel's eyes briefly, nodded, then turned away. 6 months later. The afternoon sun streamed through Elena Torres's kitchen windows. The cancer case map still hung on the wall, now preserved as historical documentation. The house had become headquarters for the Pinecrest Valley Environmental Justice Center. Rachel sat with Naomi, Robert, and new faces, scientists, lawyers, health advocates, working on the cleanup effort that would take years. The fallout had been extraordinary. Congressional hearings. EPA emergency interventions. Criminal investigations. Declassification of defense programs. International embarrassment over chemical weapons treaty violations. 3 federal agencies reorganized. Dozens of officials resigned or fired. Cordova Industries declared bankruptcy under toxic tort lawsuits. Marcus Blackwood testified extensively, receiving immunity for cooperation. The other 2 disposal sites were being excavated. Other affected communities came forward. The scandal sparked national legislation on classified program oversight and environmental accountability. In Pinecrest Valley, the cancer cluster was being addressed. Contaminated water replaced. Affected families receiving monitoring and compensation. Long-term health studies ensuring early detection. It wasn't justice. Nothing could bring back the 17 dead, undo the suffering. Elena Torres was gone. The Chin twins would never live their denied lives. But it was accountability. Truth. Foundation for prevention. Rachel's phone rang, Jennifer calling from Washington. You need to see this. The committee voted to establish a federal environmental crimes task force. They're naming it the Elena Torres Environmental Justice Task Force. Rachel felt tears coming. Really? Really? Your mother's name attached to the office that will investigate and prosecute these crimes. That's her legacy. After the call, Rachel walked outside where Atlas dozed in sunshine. She looked at the mountains that had hidden terrible secrets for 40 years, now standing clean, still contaminated, requiring years of work, but no longer hiding truth. We did it, Mom, Rachel whispered. We kept the promise. We found out why. 1 year later. On the anniversary of Elena Torres's death, the community held a memorial at the bunker site. The space had been emptied, decontaminated, converted into an educational facility, a reminder of what had been hidden and why transparency mattered. Rachel stood before several hundred people, survivors, activists, journalists, officials, families from other communities with similar contamination. My mother spent her last year searching for truth, Rachel began. She documented cases, collected evidence, asked questions powerful people didn't want answered. She died before learning the full truth, but she never stopped believing that truth mattered, that justice was possible, that one person asking questions could start a cascade forcing accountability. She paused, looking around. This discovery isn't just about the past. It's about the future we choose now that truth has surfaced. Will we perpetuate old divisions or use this moment to heal wounds festering for generations? An elderly woman stepped forward, Sarah Whitehorse's sister. My family has lived on this land for 10 generations. We watched it poisoned, watched loved ones sicken and die, were told we were imagining problems, being superstitious, standing in the way of progress. Today, finally, we have acknowledgement. Not just of contamination, but of the deliberate choice to conceal it. Others spoke, families sharing stories, scientists explaining remediation plans, lawyers discussing ongoing prosecutions, young people talking about environmental justice movements inspired by Pinecrest Valley's fight. As the ceremony concluded, people placed flowers and mementos at a memorial stone inscribed with the names of those who died from the contamination. 17 names, including Elena Torres and the Chin twins, each representing a life cut short by decisions prioritizing secrecy over safety. Rachel placed her hand on her mother's name, feeling the carved letters under her palm. Your legacy isn't just in your name on a federal task force, Mom. It's in every person here who decided to fight, every family finding courage to demand answers, every community refusing to accept that powerful interests can poison people without consequence. Atlas pressed against her leg, and Rachel smiled through tears. The work wasn't over, years of remediation ahead, more fights to fight, more secrets to expose. But the foundation had been laid. The steel door had been opened. Truth revealed. Justice, delayed but not denied, finally being served. And from that mountain bunker, from the courage of one wilderness guide and her loyal dog, from a community refusing to accept dismissal of their suffering, a movement had begun that would transform how America addressed environmental crimes, corporate accountability, and the rights of communities to know what threaten their health. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. And the truth that emerges changes everything.